Hello, Catherine Foley is my name, and I'm going to read today from my book Beyond the Breakwater. And today's chapter is chapter 39, The Boys of 2F. That job in Kilkenny in the early 1980s, I was shortlisted for it, but before I knew it, I was offered a permanent job in the vocational school of Tipperary town, a role I accepted. It was my first teaching job, so I was very excited and eager to start. From the beginning, they could see I hadn't a clue, and I could see that those boys in 2F would try me sorely. They were a mix of farm and town boys. Some of them came on the bus each morning, and some were often late, wandering in as if they were still only waking up. A handful of them were bright-eyed and thin. I remember them pouring into my classroom, whooping and hollering, hurling bags across the desks to a chorus of, "Well, miss," and "How are you, miss?" They were a ramshackle bunch of misfits. They all struggled in school. Many of them were hardly able to read, and yet each one was as gifted and as clever as you'd ever want a boy to be. They were the bottom rung class of second year, and were viewed by nearly one and all as near hopeless cases when it came to schoolwork. Of course, they loved mitching school, especially on mart days, when they could stand at corners and smoke, chat and spit like grown-up men. They loved action films, bad language, rude gestures, double entendres and free classes. It goes without saying that they hated school, but most especially they hated Irish. "Oh, miss," they'd groan when I gave them homework. I spent days on the past tense, on I'm sure kata, hoping they'd respond to the simplicity of speaking in this one tense in Irish. I tried to incite them to tell me what had happened to them. "Cá raibh, where were you? Cá the Harla, what happened? Inishtam faoi sin, tell me about that." I'd get them to repeat lines. In between, they'd continue their whispered talk about Rambo and Arnold Schwarzenegger and whatever programmes they'd seen on television the night before. They also loved looking at scabs and wounds, gouging their names into the desks or onto their bags, fighting and firing chalk at each other. I taught them the Irish version of that lilting song, The Whistling Gypsy, as translated by Pruntius O'Moynig, and I discovered that they especially loved the chorus, which they corrupted joyously to suit their own designs, rhyming do with screw. "Audie screw, Audie screw, Audie." The rude alternative corrupted the line entirely, but at each chorus they'd sing that Audie screw section with renewed gusto and abandon, laughing and cheering themselves on, stamping and banging on the tables as we did a run-through for the recording that I was making. It was only when I played the tape back that you could hear a pin drop as they listened to themselves in wonderment. It was a moment of discovery and wonder for me too, as I realised what they wanted, to be shown versions of themselves. It was like holding a mirror up to them, and they were fascinated by what it revealed. Day after day they'd troop in and look up at me in anticipation of the recorder. It was as if they expected I was going to do a magic trick. "A bhuachali tóg gimach vor lower," I'd say, "Boys, take out your books," knowing I was a kind of commander-in-chief and that my job was to maintain order and rein in the troops when a skirmish broke out along the battlefront that was my classroom. One Friday afternoon, when it was clear they only wanted to be away out the door and were only looking for an excuse to shout, jump out of their seats, tell a joke and run around the room, I brought two of them up to the top of the class to act out a make-believe exchange between a Garda and a cyclist with no lights. The seated boys in the class showed no mercy as they egged on the two at the top, who did their best with the dialogue, blushing and stumbling over the words, until someone threw a pencil at the blackboard and the heckling and stomping gathered apace. I stormed up from the back of the classroom to try to restore order, the class at its most frenzied. Struggling to bring them under control, I looked about me wildly, wishing I could be beamed up. And to my horror, I noticed one of the school's caretakers peering in through the door's glass panel. With his raised eyebrows and obvious shock, it was clear he disapproved of the chaos. The day the inspector, also known as the Kickera, came, they did their best, whispering to each other to shut up, punching any neighbour who spoke out of turn. Their loyalty to me was never in question. Today, when I think back, I miss those gentle, if wild boys of Tipperary, and I feel great regard for them. I hope they are still laughing and sparring in the foothills of the Galties. I hope they have work, and I hope that on occasion they fill their lungs and sing the Whistling Gypsy, or as it's known in Irish, An Spalpeen Fánach, complete with their own bawdy take on the lyrics. So that's all for this evening. Talk to you again tomorrow. Thank you.